Hi, today I'd like to show you some illustrations I've got from a book. These are done by George Cruikshank, who was born in 1792 and died in 1878 in London. And he had 11 children, but all of those 11 children were illegitimate. And there's some pictures of him. And he was also illustrator for Dickens. So this is the book I've got. It's the comic almanac. Now, almanac is like a yearly publication, and it gives you usually per month, little notes. It tends to be things like gardening and farming, when to do this, when to do that, what happens here, what happens there. And as you can see, it says, with illustrations by George Cruikshank. Now this starts in 1835. Now this is a later publication, but the first is 1835. Let's have a look at the first illustration. This one's January 1835. And so you get a view of London at that time. So he illustrated for Dickens, and Dickens, you can see this same sort of characteristics in the city of huge crowds, lots of things going on. There's people falling over, there's fights carrying out, very crowded, and things could happen. It's on the verge of chaos in all of these places. But he was humorous. He tended to do things like political satire. So let's have a bit more about Cruikshank. George Cruikshank was the foremost British illustrator and caricaturist of 1800s. During his career, Cruikshank produced well over 10,000 drawings and etchings, ranging from book illustrations to political caricatures and social satire. He illustrated over 860 books, plus countless periodicals and magazines. His illustrations for the novels of Charles Dickens and many others brought him great fame during his lifetime. His masterful technique has had a lasting impact on the art of caricature and book illustration, and even laid the foundation of modern graphic novel. Let's have a look at another picture. That one is January. Now we go to February. Focus a bit more. You can see the characters of those days. There's a dog chasing a man. The roads are very dirty and unkempt. There's little side looks. It looks like they've got some sort of lighting there. But you can see the characters there, very overdone. So this woman looks like she's trying to cross the road and it's very muddy and she's got an umbrella. So George Cruikshank was the son of Isaac Cruikshank, one of the great cartoonists of the time. Cruikshank learned his trade by working as an assistant and pupil of his father. His older brother, Robert Cruikshank, also followed in their father's footsteps and eventually became an illustrator and caricaturist as well. Cruikshank's early works consisted mainly of caricatures and political satire. His favourite targets were the royal family and leading politicians of the time. So that's February. Let's have a look at March. March is very windy, and you've got these people in this wind. This man's got his hat blown off. That's the trouble. In those days, everybody wore hats, and so during windy weather, it must have been quite difficult to keep your hat on. So there's people getting blown about, a woman's getting her skirts blown around, dog getting blown around. So you can see it's and this is the period of William IV. He had a very short reign in the 1830s. 1837, you've got Queen Victoria came in, so just 2 years before Victoria's ascension to the throne. So this is last of the what you would call the Hanoverian period and beginning of the Victorian period. Now, under Georges, from George the First to George the Fourth, you always call that the Georgian period, and under Victoria, you always call it the Victorian period. But that 10 years when it was under William the Fourth, I'm not sure what you would call it under Williaminian or something. I don't know. Maybe somebody will be able to tell me. But you had this 10 years between the end of the Georgian period and the beginning of the Victorian period. So his attacks on the royal family were so savage that it is said that King George paid him a large sum not to caricature him. Cruikshank also gained inspiration from political and social events of the time. He drew cartoons satirising British foreign policy, particularly imperialist wars with China and its rivalry with France. So that's March, very windy March. Let's have a look. Another one. And this one's April. Again, you got these. In those periods, you didn't have people staying indoors that much because there was nothing for them to do. There was no TV, there was no radios. So people tended to congregate outside a lot more. And you get this in this sort of thing that people are standing around, looking what's happening, sometimes getting involved in fights and things like that. But it was very much a period when people, and the houses weren't all that good for the working class, so most people sort of stood outside, seeing what they could see and interacting with each other. And then you've got these little boy in front, I'm not sure what he's trying to ask them for, and these girls bending down. He might well be a bit of a lad because he's quite short, he's very young, and yet he looks like he's smoking a pipe. And then you got a bit further along these boys. And they've got some altercation with this guy who looks like he's selling pies or something like that. So we carry on saying that George, his drawings, which satirises contemporary society, were especially well received. So you can see this is contemporary society in London at that period. And he was favourably compared to the great Hogarth, as well as to James Gillray, whom Cruikshank acknowledged as an early influence. His satirical genius first found expression in The Scourge, a political publication between 1811 and 1816. At this time his caricatures were in the style of Gillray, but about 1819 he began to illustrate books and developed a style of his own. Among his caricatures were those of Napoleon, the impostures of Joanna Southcott, the Corn Law, the domestic infelicities of the regent and his wife are noted. A committed British patriot to the point of overzealousness, Cruikshank also devoted his considerable talent to pro-British propaganda, including developing the caricature of John Bull, the personification of the British people. He also drew the British Beehive, an illustration of British society. So that's April. So this is May, May Day, May dancing. Looks like they've got ladies with their umbrellas, Bud the florist. There's a little band going, music playing, some dancing. Looks like they're going to go off to a fair. Fairs were quite big in those periods. People would always go to fairs because there was nothing to do. So any fair, anything going on, people would go and spend some time. So that's May. And then June, we've got, this looks like it's an art gallery. We've got all these people looking at the pictures in the art gallery. You can see their comical faces. They're all staring up. Somebody's getting very hot. And you can see it's very similar to a Dickensian type of society. His illustrations adorned the works of great authors such as Charles Dickens, Sir Walter Scott, and William Ainsworth, and he gained an international fame as a book illustrator. His collaboration with Charles Dickens led to a friendship between the two men, but they were very public falling out when Cruikshank took credit for Oliver Twist, claiming that he had suggested the plot to Dickens. Cruikshank later had a similar controversy with the author William Ainsworth, claiming that he was the creator of one of his books as well. Despite these controversies, Cruikshank's career flourished and his book illustrations brought him international fame. So these are the illustrations that they've been talking about. Let's have a look at the next one. And we've got July, where people are parks were a big thing in those days, especially in the Georgian period. People went to parks, walking around, meeting people, being looked at. You know, especially ladies would be walking around trying to get attention, either from suitors or other people. And so it was a place to meet and gather. There would have been music, there would have been places to eat. And it looks like this is a time when people went out to these gardens, as they were called, and they would walk around in their fancy dresses, meeting each other, having a good time. Vauxhall, I believe, was one of the big ones in Regency time, where you would go there to be seen. And now August, you got some people selling wares there. Later in life, Cruikshank devoted himself to social causes. Although he had been a heavy drinker and a smoker as a young man, Cruikshank now used his satiric talents to attack these vices. He devoted himself with great zeal to the Temperance movement, drawing many cartoons and illustrations in favour of abstinence and exposing the horrors of alcohol abuse. They've got the bottle, 8 illustrations in 1847, and the drunkard's children, 8 plates in 1848. Cruikshank first produced his satirical crusade against drunkenness. In recognition of his efforts, Cruikshank was elected the president of the National Temperance League, a British organisation that advocated alcohol prohibition. So you've got these people selling their wares. Children, there's always lots of children because everybody had about 10 children. So there's always loads of children there, look, trying to sell them pies. And a coach trying to make his way through this horde of people. He did get married. He was married twice. His first wife to Mary Ann Walker, 1807 to 1849, ended with Mary's death. 2 years later, Cruikshank married Eliza Widdowson. They remained married until his death, and by all appearances, the couple lived a contented and traditional Victorian marriage. Cruikshank did not have any children by either of his wives, but upon his death, it was discovered that George Cruikshank had actually fathered 11 children, with his mistress, a former servant, whom he had installed in a house just a few doors down from where he'd lived with his wife. The affair only came to light due to the provisions in his will, which left part of his estate to his mistress and their children. How remarkable that he could not have kept this relationship secret for all these years, but somehow ignored, or at least failed to publicly acknowledge, his enormous brood of illegitimate children living just down the street from him. So who knows if his wife knew about this affair and accepted it because she couldn't have children or something like that. I don't know. But there you have it. Victoria is always known for their great morality, and yet, you know, the time of the Ripper murders, they said that a quarter of the women in the East End did sort of casual prostitution. So people from the West End came down to meet these women. So this morality was only a lip service, really. This is September, and it looks like there's a fair. So it looks like there's some fair going on. There's some staging, people going, some children being pulled or pulling their parents. But then there's a cow or something that's got loose and chasing people about. It's there, causing mayhem. And it looks like there's some acrobats in the distance. It could be Smithfield, because Smithfield was the place where they had the animals. And I think they did have Smithfield shows, so maybe it's in Smithfield where looks like one of the cows has got out of control. That's September. You could just do up to the end of the year. So we've got now October, and we've got the people coming off the coach. People would be on the top of the coach, and then there's this ladder that they use to bring them down from the coach, taking down their luggage. This was just before the beginning of the railways. Here again, people coming out of the coach. And often there was people near the coach looking for people that had come from the countryside and were a bit naive. And you've got a Hogarth one, where a woman comes from the countryside to London. She doesn't really know London. And there's this old woman who's a bit of a madame who takes her in and says, you know, I can find you a place to live and stuff like that. And she's so innocent that she goes along with her and then becomes a prostitute. So there's always these people looking out for vulnerable people coming into the city, taking advantage. So you had to watch yourself when you went to London to make sure you weren't abused in any way. October, now we've got November. Again, we've got some people, young boys smoking, mucking about. Some just look like they got a cold because it's winter time. And others reading papers and books. And you can see the type of hat they used in it as a flatter hat. Later on it became a very tall hat. In the times of Brunel, they had these huge top hats. But at this period, they have got these shorter hats. So again, you can tell the date of many things by their clothing, especially the men's and the women's fashions. And then we got December. Have a look at this one. And it's a Christmas. It looks like a Christmas party. All the women with their fancy hats. Have gone the Regency period, when women had very high waistlines and long, elegant, like Grecian type gowns. And here we are getting much more of what we called a typical sort of Victorian dresses, quite bustles with pouchy arms, big arms, and the men had these waistcoats. And that it looks like something from a Dickens novel. And it looks like they're getting a Christmas pudding there. I hope that has been of interest to you. If it has, please give us a like. There are a load more illustrations in this book. Also, they've got some quite good, interesting stories. A quite funny one about a gardener and how he had been taken advantage of by his gardeners. I hope that has been of interest. Please give it a like, and I'll come back to you soon with some other illustrations and life of the Victorian and Georgian and previous periods. Thanks a lot. Bye.